Hello everyone, welcome back to the Strange Night podcast channel. Episode 1, The Mirror Room. They say mirrors never lie, but no one ever asks who they're telling the truth to. Elena Foster was a freelance photographer specializing in interior architecture for Home and Design Northwest. That October, she landed a lucrative contract to photograph the newly restored Halcyon Hotel, a converted 1920s building perched at the edge of Seattle's Capitol Hill. The manager, Mr. Vaughn, was a polite man with pale blue eyes and a rehearsed kind of charm. He said, "There's a special room we'd like to feature on the cover. We call it the Mirror Room." The room was on the 7th floor, at the very end of the hall, door marked MR07. When he unlocked it, a faint breath of cold air drifted out. Not from the AC, but like something exhaled after being trapped too long. The entire chamber was made of mirrors, walls, ceiling, even the floor, reflecting dozens of warm yellow lights set along the edges. In the center stood a single white armchair, and in the far corner, a thin curtain swayed slightly, though the air was still. Elena stepped inside, surrounded by infinite versions of herself. Each reflection seemed slightly out of sync. She raised her camera. Click, click, click. The first shots looked fine, until photo number 13. In that frame, someone was standing just behind her, a shadow-shaped figure, vague but human. She turned. Nothing. Just glass and light. 3 days later, she sat in her studio editing the photos. She zoomed in on the 13th shot. The shape was still there. In the next one, closer. In the next, right behind her shoulder, the head tilted slightly toward the lens. When she enhanced the image, she could make out what looked like a hand resting on her left shoulder. Slender, gray, dust-colored fingers. Elena shivered. She emailed Mr. Vaughn, asking if anyone could have wandered into the shot during her session. His reply came hours later. "Thank you for notifying us. We'll look into it. But please do not return to the hotel, per the owner's request." The tone unsettled her more than the photo itself, so of course she went back the next morning. At the front desk, no one was there. The lobby was empty, the carpet damp with humidity. She took the elevator up. It jerked twice before reaching the 7th floor. The corridor was silent. Every door shut tight, except MR07, hanging slightly ajar. She pushed it open. No warm glow, no mirrors, just a dark, empty chamber. But when she stepped inside, the flash of her camera bounced back from somewhere, as if the mirrors were still there, just hiding in the dark. She snapped a photo. The burst of light revealed hundreds of faces all around her. Not her reflections, but strangers, men, women, children, all staring directly at her, mouths moving soundlessly. She turned to run, but the door slammed shut. Her phone started buzzing. The screen lit up. Her own number was calling. She hesitated, then answered. On the other end, her own voice whispered, low, cracked, exhausted. "Don't look in the mirror. No matter what you see, don't look." The phone slipped from her hand, shattering on the mirrored floor. At that instant, the walls began to glow faintly, one reflection at a time, until the room was filled with soft light. And in every reflection stood a different version of her, pale, hollow-eyed, hair in disarray. They all lifted their cameras. Click. In the flash that followed, she realized only one of them was still real. 3 days later, hotel management filed a police report. A photographer broke into a restricted area and disappeared. Room MMR07 was sealed off. There was no record of any mirror room in the hotel's blueprints. No one named Elena Foster was listed among authorized contractors. But on her computer, investigators found one folder, mirror room _ originals. Inside were 12 ordinary photos. Photo 13 was blank. 14, 15, 16, all showed the same empty mirrored space, washed in white light. And in each one, a faint face gazed out from the glass. At the bottom of the metadata, the camera had automatically added: subject, Elena Foster. Photographer, Elena Foster. Date, file created by The Mirror Room. Today, if you look closely at the official promotional images of the Halcyon Hotel, zoom in on the cover photo, the one showing the 7th floor lobby mirrors, you can just make out a young woman standing in the reflection, camera in hand, smiling faintly, and staring straight at you. Episode 2: The Pale Man Under the Bed. After her father passed away, Lena, a nursing student in her final year, decided to rent a small, old house on the outskirts of Chicago. It was cheap, too cheap maybe, and the landlord had only one strange rule: don't look under the bed at night. Lena laughed it off, assuming it was some weird superstition from an eccentric old man. The first night passed quietly until around 3 a.m., when she heard faint creaks beneath the floorboards. She thought it was just a stray cat, but when she leaned down with her flashlight, there was nothing there. Only the empty wooden floor and the hum of her own heartbeat. The next night, the sound returned, slower this time, followed by a faint, wheezing breath. She froze. The air felt colder near the bed, as if someone was exhaling from underneath it. She pulled the blanket over her head and waited for morning, her chest tight, her pulse pounding in her ears. A few nights later, while studying late, her lamp flickered. In that split second of stuttering light, she saw something move. A pale, skeletal hand sliding out from beneath the bed, its bony fingers curling around the edge of the blanket. Lena screamed and ran from the room. When she returned with her neighbor, the room was empty. The only sign of anything wrong was a set of long scratch marks carved deep into the floor, and the smell of something wet and rotten that clung to the air. The next morning, she went to see the landlord. The old woman looked at her with weary eyes. "My daughter used to live in that room," she said softly. "She was very sick, bedridden for years. When she died, we couldn't move her body." Lena frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" The woman's voice dropped to a whisper. "Because when we went to her room, she had crawled under the bed, and she never came back out." That night, Lena packed her things in a rush, determined to leave before dark. But as she zipped up her suitcase, the floor creaked, the same slow rhythm, right beneath her. She knelt down, trembling, and lifted the edge of the blanket. A pale face stared back at her, skin stretched thin, eyes sunken and gray, lips split and dry. It smiled. "I've been waiting for someone to sleep here again," it rasped. Lena screamed and bolted out the door. When the police arrived hours later, they found nothing. The room was empty, the bed was clean. Only a few strands of long, dark hair were caught in the cracks of the wooden floor. A month later, the house was rented again. The new tenant said that every night the blanket slipped off the bed on its own, and sometimes, in the mirror, just before dawn, they could see pale fingers brushing the back of their neck. Episode 3: The Lake That Whispers. When Mark and Julia bought their summer cabin by Black Pine Lake, it seemed like a dream. The water was clear as glass, the pine trees whispered in the wind, and the nearest neighbor was miles away. After years of city noise, the silence felt like heaven. but silence can play tricks. It started one night when Julia woke up to the sound of someone calling her name. Soft, almost gentle. She thought it was Mark at first, but when she turned, he was fast asleep beside her. The voice came again, floating through the half-open window. "Julia." It was distant, distorted, like it came from under the water. The next morning she told Mark. He laughed it off. "Probably kids camping on the far side," he said. But when they took the boat across the lake later that day, the other shore was empty. Just trees, rocks, and water black as oil. That night, Mark heard it too. Not a voice this time, but whispering. Low, wet, bubbling whispers that rose from beneath the floorboards, as if the lake itself was breathing under the house. The following morning, they found damp footprints leading from the dock to their porch, bare human footprints, but they stopped right at the front door. Mark tried to brush it off again, but Julia was no longer sleeping. She sat by the window at night, watching the dark lake ripple. Sometimes she swore she could see someone standing in the water, a shape just below the surface, staring back. One evening she walked down to the dock, drawn by a faint humming. The lake was still. Her reflection trembled on the water's surface, but behind it, just barely visible, was another face. Pale, hollow-eyed, smiling. Mark found her an hour later, standing knee-deep in the water, her eyes unfocused. When he pulled her out, her skin was freezing cold, and she whispered, "They said it's so peaceful down there." "They just want someone to talk to." He dragged her back to the cabin and locked the doors. But all night he heard wet hands slapping against the windows, and when he tried to call for help, the phone line was dead. By morning, Julia was gone. The footprints led down to the dock and ended at the edge of the lake. Her sandals floated a few feet from shore. Mark dove in after her, screaming her name. Divers found him 3 days later, 30 feet below the surface, his body tangled in weeds. But his face was turned upward, frozen in a silent scream, as if he'd seen something reaching for him from the dark. The police wrote it off as an accident. The property was sold again a few months later. Locals say if you stand by the lake at night, when the wind dies and the water's still, you can hear two voices calling softly from beneath the surface. Julia, Mark, and if you listen long enough, they start whispering your name too. Episode 4, The Door Without a Lock. When the Miller family moved into an old house on the outskirts of Oregon, they thought it was a fresh start after years of struggle. The house was spacious, affordable, and surrounded by dense pine forest. Everything seemed perfect, except for one strange door in the basement. The door was dark, wooden, and ancient. It had no handle, no lock, just stood silently at the end of the damp hallway. The previous owner had only said one thing when handing over the house: just leave it closed. At first, the Millers ignored it, but every night they heard faint knocking coming from the basement, as if someone, or something, was pounding from behind the door. One evening, their young son Evan ran upstairs, pale and trembling. "Dad, there's someone down there. They're calling my name." Tom, his father, grabbed a flashlight and went down to check. There was no one. Only the cold draft and the occasional drip of water from the old pipes. He reassured his son and locked the basement door. That night, however, the knocking grew louder. 3 slow, deliberate knocks echoing through the house until morning. The next day, Tom decided to force the door open. He brought a crowbar and a flashlight, determined to see what was behind it. As he pressed the crowbar against the frame, a faint moan came from the other side. Not metal scraping, not wind. Human. He froze, his heart pounded. Then, a hoarse whisper drifted through the door. "Don't open it. Startled, he stepped back. When he called for his wife, the voice was gone. Only the echo of his own voice bounced back at him through the cold, empty basement. That night, Evan dreamed of the door. In the dream, it slowly creaked open, revealing an endless hallway, black as pitch, with dozens of pale hands reaching out from the walls, beckoning him inside. The next morning, Evan was gone. The basement door was wide open. Tom and his wife rushed down. The door now stood slightly ajar, cold air spilling out like it led into a deep, endless void. They called for Evan. No answer. Only a faint, distant sound carried from the darkness. "Dad, help me." Tom fell to his knees, staring through the crack. Inside, there was nothing but darkness. No floor, no walls, only an abyss. And, far in the shadows, he saw Evan standing, pale and blurred, reaching out. Tom lunged forward, but the moment his fingers brushed his son's hand, the door slammed shut. When the police arrived, all they found was Tom unconscious on the floor. The door had vanished, sealed into the wall, as if it had never existed. Evan was never found. A year later, the house was sold again. The new owner said they still hear the knocking at night. 3 slow, deliberate knocks, coming from somewhere beneath the floor. And sometimes, in the dark, a child's voice whispers, "Dad, open the door for me." Episode 5. The Vanishing Train. On a cold November evening in rural Pennsylvania, the commuter train ran late. Daniel Harper, a young journalist, waited alone on the deserted platform, his breath forming clouds in the freezing air. The station had been abandoned for years, yet somehow, the digital schedule showed a single train arriving, track 3, exactly at 11:17 p.m. When the train's headlights pierced the darkness, it looked normal at first, an old diesel engine, windows fogged from the heat inside. Daniel climbed aboard, hoping for a quiet ride home. The car was empty, except for a single figure seated at the far end, a man in a tattered suit, face obscured by shadows. The train lurched forward, rattling over the tracks. Daniel noticed something odd. The passing landscape looked wrong. Houses, trees, and even signs seemed out of time. The clock on the wall of the car blinked 12:47, then 3:21, then 8:03, moving at its own rhythm. He tried to speak to the man, but he remained silent, hands folded neatly, head tilted slightly as if studying Daniel. Then the lights flickered, and for a brief instant Daniel could see through the windows. There was nothing outside. No tracks, no forest, no towns. Only a swirling gray mist stretching infinitely in all directions. Panic set in. Daniel tried to pull the emergency brake, but it didn't budge. The intercom crackled with a garbled voice. "Welcome aboard. The train only stops for those who belong." The man in the tattered suit stood and began walking toward him. With each step, the car seemed to stretch longer, the ceiling bending like wet paper. Daniel stumbled backward, heart pounding. "Where am I?" he demanded. The man stopped, tilting his head. "Somewhere you've always been. Somewhere you will never leave." The train slowed, lights flickering violently. Daniel's reflection appeared in the window, but it wasn't his own face. Hollow eyes, pale skin, and a faint, eerie grin stared back at him. He screamed, and the world twisted. When the train came to a halt, it wasn't at the station. It was parked on an overgrown platform, completely abandoned. Rusted tracks stretched in every direction. No other cars existed. The tattered man was gone. Daniel stepped off and ran toward the road, only to discover the station itself had vanished. In its place, there was nothing but mist and a sign. Last stop, nowhere. He never found another train, never saw another person. Weeks later, he wrote the story anyway, titling it The Vanishing Train. But every time he looked at the photos he took that night, the windows of the train showed him, seated beside the tattered man, grinning. And now, every time a train passes through his town, he swears he can hear a faint, distorted whistle calling his name. Episode 6. The Wayfarer Inn. On a remote mountain road in Vermont, there's a small roadside inn that every bus driver tries to avoid. The Wayfarer Inn. No one remembers when it first appeared, and no one is certain who owns it. Yet travelers all tell the same story. If you stop here on a rainy night, you may never leave in the way you expect. Anna, a medical student, was driving from Boston back home after her final exams. Heavy rain poured down, and thick fog obscured everything. In the distance, she saw a flickering yellow light. It was a roadside inn, and she had no other choice but to stop. Outside, the inn appeared deserted. The dim light flickered weakly, and the old door creaked in the wind. Anna stepped inside, hands trembling. The interior was large but strange. Passengers sat silently, moving past each other without speaking, without a single motion. At the front desk, no one was present. A large ledger lay waiting. Anna opened it and saw hundreds of names, scrawled in messy handwriting, names she had never heard before. She walked down the hall, and a whispering sound came from the far end. A figure appeared, a man in an old, worn suit, his eyes dark as night. He raised a hand, pointing at Anna, and said, "You've arrived. Now, you have only one choice. Stay." Anna panicked and ran, but every door she tried to open led her back to the same dim room. The silent passengers remained, sitting in their places, as if waiting for her. When she screamed, all the lights suddenly flickered on. She realized that each passenger's face was familiar. They were people she had seen in news photos of missing persons over the past several years. Every one of them turned to look at her, pale eyes staring, whispering, "You will stay like us." The next morning, when the police checked the area, there was no sign of any inn on the map. All that remained was Anna's car, abandoned by the roadside, the door ajar. No trace of her was ever found. Travelers still say that on rainy nights they sometimes see the flickering yellow light on the mountain road. And if they stop, sometimes they hear a whisper calling their name from inside the inn. Episode 7. The Whistling Woods. Deep in the forests of northern Michigan, there is a stretch of woods locals refuse to enter after sunset. They call it the Whistling Woods, named for the strange, haunting melodies that drift through the trees at night. The whistling doesn't come from birds, wind, or human voices. It comes from somewhere else, something older. Ethan, a hiker and amateur photographer, wanted to capture the beauty of the autumn woods. He set out alone, camera in hand, determined to reach the heart of the forest before dusk. Birds chirped, leaves crunched underfoot, and for a while, it was peaceful. As twilight approached, he noticed a faint melody, soft, airy, almost like someone was whistling a tune he couldn't recognize. He stopped. The whistling seemed to come from all directions at once, circling him. He shook his head. "It's just the wind," he thought. But the melody grew sharper, almost teasing, echoing between the trees. Hours passed, and the sun sank below the horizon. Ethan realized he had wandered deeper than intended. The whistling was louder now, and the trees seemed to bend, forming dark tunnels that weren't there before. He tried to retrace his steps, but every path looked identical. Every landmark vanished. Suddenly, the whistling changed. Slower, deliberate, and now accompanied by soft footsteps behind him. He turned, but saw no one. Shadows stretched unnaturally, moving independently of the trees. Panic set in. "Hello?" he shouted. No answer. Only the whistling, now circling him faster, like a predator closing in. He ran. Branches tore at his clothes. Roots threatened to trip him, but the forest refused to let him escape. Then, in a small clearing, he saw them. Dozens of figures, pale and thin, faces obscured, standing silently in a ring. Each one tilted its head, as if listening to the whistling. The sound intensified. Ethan felt his ears split, his vision blur. He stumbled backward and noticed something terrifying. Each figure's face reflected him, but hollowed, grinning with a mouth far too wide, eyes too dark. The whistling stopped suddenly. Silence fell. Ethan turned to flee, but the forest behind him had vanished. Only the ring of figures remained, moving slowly toward him, hands reaching, whispering in unison, "Join the song." Days later, a search party found Ethan's backpack at the forest edge, camera inside. The SD card contained dozens of photos of empty forest paths. Except in the last frames, the pale, hollow-eyed figures appeared, closing in, always one step behind him. No one ever saw Ethan again, and locals swear if you listen carefully on quiet autumn nights, you can hear a haunting whistle drifting through the trees, calling your name. Episode 8. The Mirror Manor. On the outskirts of New Orleans, hidden behind overgrown ivy and cracked stone walls, stood an abandoned mansion locals called Mirror Manor. It was said that anyone who entered would confront not just their reflection, but the version of themselves they feared the most. Clara, a graduate student researching urban legends, decided to explore the mansion for her thesis. She pushed past the rusted gates and stepped onto the gravel path, the fog curling around her ankles. The front door loomed ahead, dark and ominous. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. Every wall was lined with tall, tarnished mirrors, some cracked, some covered in grime. Clara felt her reflection following her every step, though the room was empty. She noticed something unsettling. Her reflection moved slightly out of sync, as if mocking her. She walked through the halls, documenting each room. In one, she found a grand ballroom. Moonlight filtered through shattered windows, illuminating a figure standing at the far end. Clara froze. The figure was her exact double, except the eyes were hollow black voids, and the mouth curved into a sinister grin. The figure raised a hand. Clara instinctively mirrored the gesture, but when she looked down, her own hand began to stretch unnaturally, fingers elongating, claws forming. Panic surged through her. "This is who you are," the figure whispered, voice like broken glass. "And who you will become." Clara ran through the mansion, doors appearing and disappearing, hallways twisting impossibly. Every mirror she passed showed not only her reflection, but hundreds of warped, nightmarish versions of herself. Some screaming silently, others crawling on walls or ceilings. She found a small study, and in it, an ornate hand mirror. The figure appeared behind her in the glass, whispering urgently, "Look into it, or be trapped forever." Terrified, Clara lifted the mirror. Her reflection was gone. In its place was a swirling darkness, and from it, dozens of twisted, screaming faces pressed toward her. She dropped the mirror and the glass shattered, sending shards flying. The next morning, when neighbors checked the abandoned mansion, it appeared normal, just empty, dusty, and silent. Clara's backpack lay at the front gate, but she was gone. Some say that on foggy nights, you can catch glimpses of her in the mirrors of the city, walking calmly, until the reflection twists into a hollow-eyed version of herself, grinning and beckoning. Episode 9, The Hotel of Lost Souls. On the edge of the Nevada desert, a decrepit hotel sat abandoned for decades. Travelers whispered its name in fear, the Hotel of Lost Souls. Legends said those who checked in were never truly gone. They lingered between worlds, trapped in the hotel's endless corridors. Michael, a seasoned road tripper and urban explorer, was drawn to the hotel by rumors and curiosity. As he stepped through the rusted gates, the desert wind howled through broken windows. The lobby was dimly lit, chandeliers swaying without reason, dust dancing in the faint light. He found the registration desk covered in cobwebs. A ledger lay open, pages yellowed and brittle. Every page contained names, countless travelers who had entered and never returned. Michael shivered, but pushed forward. He explored the halls, camera in hand. Room after room was identical, peeling wallpaper, cracked mirrors, and a faint odor of decay. But then he heard whispers, soft at first, then urgent. "Michael, don't leave. You belong here." Turning a corner, he glimpsed figures at the end of the hall, shadows moving unnaturally, faces twisted and hollow, their mouths opening wide in silent screams. One figure stepped forward. Its face was Michael's own, pale and distorted. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, doors appearing and vanishing at random. Every time he tried to leave, he found himself back in the lobby. The chandelier above rattled violently, and whispers filled the air, overlapping and echoing. Check in, and never check out. In desperation, Michael ran up the grand staircase to the top floor. Each step groaned under his weight. At the end of the hall, a door slightly ajar revealed a room glowing faintly. He pushed it open. Inside was a mirror, reflecting not the hotel, but his own empty, hollow face staring back. Suddenly, hands reached through the mirror, clawing at him, pulling him in. Michael screamed, struggling against invisible forces. The mirror swallowed him whole, and the room vanished. Weeks later, travelers passing the old desert road reported seeing lights flicker inside the abandoned hotel. Those brave enough to peek through windows claimed they saw a lone figure pacing the lobby. Yet no one ever saw Michael leave. Some say if you hear soft whispers as the wind blows through the desert, it is him, calling your name, inviting you to check in. Episode 10, The Final Tapes. The city of Chicago had its share of haunted places, but none were as infamous as the old archival building downtown. Known only to a few, the building stored thousands of audio tapes, stories of the missing, the cursed, and the unexplained. They called it the Archive. The archivist, a middle-aged man with a tired gaze, had been working there for years. Every night he listened to tapes left by unknown narrators, documenting the strange and the terrifying. But over time he noticed something horrifying. The stories he recorded all predicted events that were happening to him. One evening he stumbled upon a tape labeled in his own handwriting. "If you are hearing this, you've already opened the box." He played it. The voice on the tape was his own, speaking of events that had not yet happened. The archive's walls seemed to close in, the air thick with whispers. He realized with a chill that every story in the tapes, from the Whistling Woods, Mirror Manor, the Hotel of Lost Souls, to Wayfarer Inn and beyond, was connected. Every missing person, every trapped soul, was somehow tied to him. As he listened, shadows in the room began to move, forming figures familiar and horrifying. Clara from Mirror Manor, Michael from the Hotel of Lost Souls, Ethan from the Whistling Woods, Anna from Wayfarer Inn, and countless others, all staring at him with hollow eyes. The archivist tried to run, but the doors vanished. Every tape he had cataloged played simultaneously, voices overlapping, chanting, "Welcome to the stories you created, to the trap you cannot escape." He fell to his knees, realizing the ultimate truth. The tapes were not just recordings, they were a trap, a loop. He had been sending his own future self into these stories all along, creating horrors that would ensnare anyone who listened. The last sound on the tape was a whisper. "If you're hearing this, you are part of it now." The archivist looked up, and through the corner of his eye, he saw a box slowly opening on the table, a black, nondescript box he did not remember placing there. From it, a light emerged, illuminating the faces of all those lost in the previous stories, beckoning him to step inside. The tape ended. Silence. When the authorities arrived days later, the building was empty. No one had ever seen the archivist again. But anyone who stumbles upon the old tapes in the archive will hear a familiar voice, their own, calling them to open the box. The stories never truly end. They only wait for the next listener.